And we're back. I'm Bill Hellkamp of Reach Development Systems. With me is Professor Scott Plum of the Minnesota Sales Institute.
Ever scratch your head and ask yourself, why did I do that? Or what was I thinking? Well, it's quite possible that you were not thinking, rather acting out of instinct and your subconscious. These are legit reasons. However, they may not hold up in court or in a conversation with your sales manager. We are so lucky to have a neuroscientist with us today to discuss the brain, why it follows, and how you can make it work for you. So put your phone on silent, grab a notepad and pen, and take notes as Bill and I discuss why the brain buys with Dr. Terry Wu and much more of episode 438 of Get Into Our Podcast.
Well, our book club is finally to chapter 12 of Beyond Selling Value. Every shot's a bullseye, target opportunity selection. And we have just a couple more chapters after this. So just to get your thinking cap on, our next book will be Psycho-Cybernetics by Dr. Matthew Maltz. So if you haven't gotten that, it's Matthew Maltz, right?
Maxwell Maltz.
Maxwell Maltz. Thank you very much. Dr. Maxwell Maltz. So make sure you get your copy. But Chapter 12, Every Shot's a Bullseye, Target Opportunity Selection on Beyond Selling Value. And what this talks about is a criteria to determine if a company or a specific deal is worth putting all of this time and effort into. So two major categories of criteria they talked about, kind of the traditional qualifying guidelines and the strategic guidelines. And I like this chapter, Scott. I think it's important to make decisions on whether, people answer RFPs all the time, what they shouldn't be answering. And I think they go after deals where there's not a good match and they have a low chance of winning. What's your thoughts on this chapter?
I agree. I think that there are some great fundamentals and a foundation to the sales process in this chapter. So it's a great reference. I love the book on how it is so foundational. If you don't have the experience of selling and you read a book like this, it really gives you a lot of context as to the role of selling and working with prospects and going through a system and a structure, which I think it's easier to manage because you can't manage what you don't measure.
Right.
And this book really lays this out well. And I think
I like things that go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's the thing you need to do.
In the best case, plan before you talk to somebody. It's great. You mentioned the RFPs, and I think a lot of companies, they get into RFPs and they kind of follow the RFP versus leading within the RFP. And I think we need to, and request for proposal RFP if folks are not aware of that, and really look for things within that RFP that you can add that are missing, or maybe give a different option that they didn't consider.
Well, and it's reasonable to talk about that because you need to make a choice on whether you should answer an RFP before you spend 100 hours going through
Absolutely.
ring hoop that they want to get you through. So here's some of the qualifying guidelines. Now, these are the traditional ones, these first 5. Product fit, are we the best option? Relationship value, is there enough money to be made? Is this a valuable enough relationship? Do they have a budget? And I know you are big on whether they can pay for the solution and whether you can help them understand whether they should pay for the solution.
How they can pay for it, yeah.
Yep. Logistics, can we sustain support? And then customer urgency. Is there an urgency there, or can we develop an urgency?
All very good areas, and there needs to be, I think, good motivation to be uncovered. And I love that urgency. And if there's not urgency to do it now, you're going to be getting a prospect that's not committed, that's going to string you along. You're going to be more committed to the outcome than they are, and it's going to be very frustrating. And when you don't have that urgency, it's tough for you to plan and prioritize. And you have to be able to say to your prospects, look, we've got a limited amount of resources here, but we're able to commit all of our resources to a commitment to us. And if there's no commitment, we're going to have to work on spending our time and energy and resources with somebody else.
And quite often, if you are going in as a salesperson and creating the opportunity, which means you're bringing new ideas, new ways of doing things to this particular prospect, chances are you will have to create that sense of urgency because they're not thinking it's a problem.
Right. And this is the scarcity principle. So Bill and I talked about negotiations some episodes back on Cialdini's rules of influence. And the scarcity is one of them that's very powerful. And by saying that you have limited resources doesn't mean that you can't handle big projects. It just says that we manage our team and our company very efficiently. We dedicate a commitment to a prospect, and we're all in when we do that. And we leverage all of our resources to that. That doesn't mean that you're small or that you can't handle big things.
Right. It just means that we're going to choose those customers well. And some of these strategic guidelines, which I got the feeling from the book, they feel these are the unique pieces that they bring to the puzzle through the process that they're suggesting. The 5 that they talk about, let's just take these in order and talk about those a little bit more. Quality of information. Do I know or can I learn what I need to know about this organization and their needs? I think that's your discovery step, right? Can I spend time with this organization finding out, will they let me?
Yeah. And I think you need to decide what information do you want to know, and don't be assumptive and think that you know it all just because you spent some time researching it. And I think sometimes salespeople spend too much time researching versus understanding what information you want and asking that from the prospect, and then having the prospect give you their information, and based on what they're thinking, what they want, what their motivation is. And too often salespeople can be assumptive because they saw something and they read something, and it might be 6 months old, and things are changing quickly in today's marketplace.
And if they're interested, they will love that you do good discovery. They will love that you're talking to a group of people, that you're trying to really find out what the needs are, because they usually haven't spent the time really finding those things out.
Right.
So the second guideline is quality of coaching. Do I have enough inside help to get this project moving forward? I think the coaching is really crucial. You've got to have a champion in there that's pushing for this. If you can't create a champion somewhere along the line in your discovery process, things will not get done.
And I think, a good question to ask somebody is, I'm kind of curious, why do you want to commit to this now? Or what would this do for you? Or what would this do for your business? Or how would what outcome do you expect to get?
Get them emotionally involved.
Yeah. So there has to be a personal reason on why somebody would want to do that.
Number 3 is the strength of the gatekeepers. Are there some people there that want to stop us? Either they're so invested in the current process or product, or they just don't like new ideas coming in.
And your champion is going to be able to tell you who those people are. Yep. If you just say, off the record, who do you think is going to be supportive and who do you think is not going to be supportive? And what is it going to take for the people that are not going to be supportive to change their position on it? And be able to give them what they want in order to appease them. I mean, we want to be able to meet everybody's needs to a level of adequacy where they don't feel like they're losing anything.
Right. Excellent. Number 4 is alignment with influencers. Are there any current or possible entrees that I have to this decision maker? Is the path pretty clear, or is there a lot of mud in the way before I can get to the person who's going to make the decision? And I think this is really important, because if you're not identifying this, you're going to spend an awful lot of time talking to the wrong people. And that's one of the big mistakes I see salespeople make, and why they don't get the sale. They've spent a long time talking to somebody who can't sign the check.
Right. Yeah. And they want it, the person inside the company wants to take credit for it, but they're not the one that can approve it. And sometimes they've got different alternatives, motivations too.
Different motivations. Yep. And then number 5 is philosophical fit. Would we play well together?
Yeah. And I think we need to, I've asked a question when I've done a negotiation class is, can we win every negotiation? And people kind of scratch their head, and I go, I think we can win every negotiation, because sometimes there are situations where it's not a fit. And if we're not committing time and money and resources and people to something that's not a fit, we win, because we're not wasting time and wasting energy and feeling like we're failing at the end, even though we succeeded, but because it wasn't a perfect fit for one reason or another, we feel like a failure.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be a perfect fit, but I'll tell you, if philosophically, and I stress this a lot in the training that I do for salespeople, if you get a customer who philosophically disagrees with how you do business, you just bought yourself a big pain in the butt.
Yeah.
They're going to hate everything you do, and the way that you do business. If it philosophically doesn't fit with them, they're going to complain about everything, because you just don't play well together.
they'll challenge you on everything. And you'll never be able to feel like they trust you because they're challenging you on everything. And they're going to have you on the run.
They don't trust you.
Right. Well, yeah, they don't. And they're being skeptical and there's misconceptions and you have to end up spending all of this time explaining things to them because it's not a philosophical fit. And we've all been there. And, we learn the hard way because we go through the process.
You just have to be careful that you don't buy yourself trouble.
And sometimes it's the concept of money and price and investment and how much you charge and what they think is expensive. And if you're having a conversation about that, it is not going to get any easier as they become a client or a customer.
Absolutely. So we'll move on from this, but I think not only in preparation for your customers, but I also do this, suggest companies do this opportunity planning with their current customers. If you haven't rated your customers into different categories, you don't know where your money drains are. And I find a lot of organizations spend time and effort on D-level customers, ones that will never be a good fit for them. They got them years ago and they just keep letting them push them around. And I think not only should you do this before an opportunity, during an opportunity, but sometimes with customers that you currently have.
Good advice.
So I did have a chance to hear from one of our listeners. I had a good conversation with Amanda from Wyoming. Wow. And Amanda is a sales manager who uses the podcast to keep herself motivated and recommends it to all of her sales team when they're out. They spend a lot of time, obviously Wyoming, a lot of room to roam, right? A lot of windshield time. And so I had a great conversation with Amanda. So thank you, Amanda, for being one of our listeners. We're going to be giving away a book. We are done with, we did run out of copies of Beyond Selling Value, and we have the second book by Mark Shanka and Dan Kosh. That is Breaking the Rules, 111 Tips for Selling Value in the Area of Procurement. And our winner this week is Chris Moritz. He contacted both Scott and I and hooked up with us on LinkedIn. So that's one way. I would encourage you to sign up for the book giveaway. We have about 5 more copies of this Breaking the Rules. You can sign up by going to our website at getinthedoorpodcast.com, fill out the form. I think our last winner did that. Or you can go on LinkedIn and sign up. You can ask us a question. Any way that you make contact with us, we put you onto that form. And as I said, we have about 5 more copies of 111 Tips for Selling Value in the Area of Procurement. Breaking the Rules, it's called.
Right. As Bill mentioned earlier, we're going to do Psycho-Cybernetics, our next book by Dr. Maxwell Maltz. This is a mainstay book when it comes to dealing with beliefs, dealing with our conceptual barriers, and to really understand how we make decisions. And we're grateful to have Dr. Terry Wu with us also, and he's going to talk about that a little bit later. But pick up the book. You will not regret reading this book, Psycho-Cybernetics. This segment of Get in the Door podcast is brought to you by The Art of Prospecting, your guide to getting in the door by Steve Kloida.
Steve Kloida was known internationally for increasing salespeople's ability to make solid appointments with qualified prospects. You too can learn this essential skill by ordering a copy of his superb book, The Art of Prospecting, your guide to getting in the door. In this book, Steve shares the top strategies and tactics he has developed, implemented, and personally tested with more than 1 million sales and prospecting calls. You can get his book on the website, theprospectingexpert.com. In addition, check out his other great online resources. Instant Sales Coaching, which will guide you through 5 online success modules. A guided prospecting process entitled Call Reluctance Transformer. And the Magnetic Selling Strategies Workbook, a detailed step-by-step guide to increasing your sales. Get any of these valuable resources at theprospectingexpert.com.
As I said earlier, we're really lucky to have Dr. Terry Wu with us. And I've known Terry for some time. I find his content to be very rich, very relevant, and constantly evolving. Terry has done a lot of work when it comes to how people make decisions, how the brain follows, and why people follow. And I'm gonna read an introduction to Terry, and we're gonna include we'll include the video that I'm gonna refer to in the show notes, so you can go to that and you can watch the video at getinthedoorpodcast.com. So in May last year, Terry gave a TED Talk on neuroscience of marketing. His talk has been watched by over 120,000 people around the world. Terry received his PhD in neuroscience from Vanderbilt University over 18 years ago. He started his marketing firm and combined the knowledge of neuroscience and marketing to give his clients a highly competitive advantage. Now, Terry is a leading expert in neuromarketing. He's well known for his ability to make neuroscience understandable and actionable in the business community. And if you ever get a chance to follow Terry and you see his name as being one of the presenters, I really encourage you to make time to sign up and follow him. And we'll give you a link to his website in the show notes of Get Into Our Podcast. So Bill and I have a couple of questions, Terry.
Well, welcome first, Terry. Welcome.
Yeah.
Nice to have you on the podcast with us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Now, after Scott's introduction, I'm afraid we don't have any time for questions. We'll try to get one or two in here.
Yeah, it adds a lot of context to everything. So I'm glad you could be with us today. Thanks for making the time. I've thought of a few questions. I know Bill has a few too. So I just kind of a broad question is, how does the brain make decisions? How do you break that down into something that's understandable that can really help us determine how we can be most influential as a salesperson?
It's a very complicated question. I like to kind of give it a simplified version. The easiest way to conceptualize how the brain makes decisions is to think that the brain has two systems when it comes to decision making. One system is the rational brain. The other system is the emotional brain. The rational brain is right inside the forehead. This part of the brain is also called the frontal cortex. It's heavily involved in reason and logic. This part of the brain becomes very active when we're solving a math problem, learning a new language, or writing a business plan. The other very important function of this part of the brain is that it controls our impulses. Alcohol can really impair this part of the brain. When after heavy drinking, a lot of people, they're just not themselves anymore because they cannot control their impulses. In prisons, if you look at the death row inmates, 1 in 5 death row inmates has suffered very severe damage to the frontal cortex with the rational brain due to concussions. So this part of the brain really controls our impulses. It does reasoning and logical thinking for us. Another part of the brain is the emotional brain. The emotional brain is also called the limbic system. This part of the brain really responsible for our emotions like happiness, joy, satisfaction, as well as anger, fear, anxiety. Over the last 2 to 3 decades, neuroscience research has shown that the emotional brain actually plays a much bigger role than the rational brain when it comes to decision making. I heard you both you guys have been talking that we make decisions or when we make sales calls, we try to really engage people in their emotions because people buy on emotions and rationalize with reasons. This is actually why, because the emotional brain is very powerful. It really is the boss controlling our rational thinking. So the emotional brain.
So you said that in sales, people buy an emotion and then rationalize with reason. So from this neuroscience perspective, tell me more about how emotion influences these decisions, because that's a big part of what Scott and I talk about, as you mentioned.
Yes. I give you an example how the emotions can influence our buying decisions. You look at it about 7 or 8 months ago, all of a sudden, toilet paper became a rare commodity. This is a kind of extreme example. People are under stress. They're experiencing intense emotions like fear. They go out to buy toilet paper. Rationally, this does not make any sense at all because toilet paper does not protect us from the virus, and there was no supply shortage. And also, at the beginning of the pandemic, crowded places were not where you want to be because they increase your chance of getting infected.
And there was no evidence that toilet paper was part of the program that you would need.
Part of the program?
Yeah, it wasn't when you were sick with COVID. It wasn't toilet paper that you needed.
Right. Exactly. It doesn't really serve any purpose at all. But when they're under stress, they feel like, okay, everybody's buying toilet paper. I should buy toilet paper as well. Unconsciously, we follow the crowd because the crowd decisions makes you feel safe.
So is that kind of the same? Today's Wednesday. We're expecting a snowstorm in Minnesota today. I expect the grocery stores to be crowded with people buying stuff like they don't own any food.
Exactly. It's we decide based on how we feel instead of how we think. And when it comes to emotions serve at least two main purposes. One purpose is to maximize our pleasures, and the other purpose is to minimize our pains. When it comes to buying decisions, maximizing our pleasure, think about buying a car. Somebody can spend $20,000 to buy a regular Toyota, but some people can spend $100,000 to buy a Lamborghini. But what's the difference? Both cars can take you from your home to your grocery store. But when you drive a Lamborghini, you want to go to your country club. It makes you feel good. It's really about how people feel can drive them how to make the buying decisions. When it comes to in the B2B world, you guys talk a lot about how to do the B2B sales. In the B2B world, one major emotion when it comes to making big purchases is to avoid the pain of being blamed, is to minimize the pain. Because if I make the wrong decision buying this expensive machine or buying this expensive software, I can get fired. So they want to
that's the old saying, right? No one ever got fired for buying IBM. Of course,
exactly.
That's not true anymore, but
exactly. So that they really try to avoid pain. And here's how the emotion of the pain can activate our kind of emotional system, make us very irrational. I give you this really interesting example. This is how actually the brain evaluates threat or the fear. You gather one group of volunteers, you give them a very painful electric shock, but you tell them you only have 1% of chance of getting this shock. How much money are you willing to pay to get out of this 1% chance of getting a shock? On average, people are willing to pay about $6 to $7 to get out of this shock, this 1% chance of getting a shock. You ask another group, say, hey, here you have got a 99% of chance of getting a painful electric shock. How much are you willing to pay? Almost 100 times higher the chance. Mm-hmm. You would think 1% chance they're going to pay $6 or $7, 100 times higher chance they're going to pay maybe $600 or $700. No, they're only going to pay about $10. So 1% of a chance of getting a shock versus 99% of a chance of getting a shock, they're almost identical in our brains. So this is how very often we overestimate the pain by losing a threat.
That's fascinating. It's just amazing how we put things into context and the rational versus the emotional.
I heard Scott. I heard you. I've spoken this a lot. That our desire to avoid pain is twice as intense as our desire to seek pleasure.
Yeah.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, it's we know what it's like to lose something that we have, but sometimes we don't know what it's like to have something that we don't. And this is why when we're selling, a salesperson should really talk about what happens if they don't get what they want or lose something that they have versus benefits. The old selling is on benefits, but sometimes, people just can't understand that. They can't put that in context.
Right. If you tell them, if you don't do this, you will lose out against your competitors. That's a very strong motivation for them to take actions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we call that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? The FUD.
Right. The FUD slide. Get the FUD slide in there. Terry, you talked about cars. I think it's the same thing with boats. They have to have the big boat because you're on the lake and all your neighbors see you. And, the ego of having a big boat is just really high when you have that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how this is going to help salespeople, right? How do we reduce this anxiety that they might have over making a decision, if that's the key versus the pleasure?
Well, when people make buying decisions, they have this kind of invisible decision anxiety because they're afraid of making a mistake. They're afraid of getting blamed for making that buying decision. One really powerful way to influence their decisions is to use the crowd influence. If you look at Amazon has done a very good job in using crowd influence. Think about Amazon. Amazon does not have a single salesperson, but Amazon really can move the customers from the beginning to the end, the sales process really flawlessly. It's simply because Amazon knows how to influence their customers using the crowd influence. The crowd influence, obvious crowd influence is how many reviews you have, the ratings, and how many how many questions got answered, and whether that product carries the bestseller label or Amazon's choice label. Those are the obvious crowd influence factors. There's another really subtle crowd influence factor Amazon recently introduced. If you look at the reviews, very often you see Amazon tells you this reviewer is from the United States. That's a subtle nudge. It tells you this. It tells you you have something in common with this reviewer. That very subtle commonality can really increase the influence of that review on you. We follow the crowd. This is what, everybody knows that. But also the thing is, if we don't just follow a crowd, who we follow actually has a big factor in the crowd influence. Depends on who's in the crowd. There's many actually studies, but here's one interesting example that make it easy to understand this. Say you have there's a young boy, you have a grandson or you have a son. You decide to say, let's adopt a dog. But this young boy, he's really afraid of dog. And what would you do? You have one choice, you take the dog back to the shelter. Second choice, you let the boy cry until he gets tired of it. But the third option is you set up a play date. You invite all his friends who love playing with dogs. You bring all these kids at his age, invite them to your house, let them play with the dog. Within probably 10 to 20 minutes, this little boy is going to warm up to the dog. So this is actually the crowd influence. No matter how, as an adult, you can play with the dog all you want to, but that little boy is not going to recognize that's a safety signal. But unless he sees somebody as his age are playing with the dog, and that makes him feel safe. So we don't just follow the crowd. We actually we really look at it, who's in the crowd.
So in sales, we tend to use testimonials. We tend to use references. Then you can call these people and get assurances that we do a good job and that they have used our product before, using people's logos in our advertising.
Yes. One powerful technique I found was to use testimonials and to use testimonials from companies that are similar to the companies that your prospect are working for. That make very powerful. If you're trying to sell to Amazon, a big company, you can say, okay, I've been doing business with Google. It's another giant company. Or you're selling to somebody from Dell Computer. You can say, okay, somebody from HP, they're using the same product. You bring the similar companies. If you just say, hey, we're selling to Dell, and then you end up saying a local small company, with 200 people bought my product or services. It's good, it's influential, but it's not as influential as you bring up another big company that have used your product or services.
Can that ever be a challenge? Let's say, for example, an example I've used before is if I'm selling to Coke, can I still sell to Pepsi, or does Pepsi, because they're so competitive, have to say, well, I can't be a follower of Coke. I've got to do something different.
I think probably more than likely they're going to say, okay, if they're doing it, we probably should do it too. They want to be very competitive. It really depends on whether that product gives Coke a competitive edge. If it does, Pepsi probably will follow.
Okay, thanks.
Getting into some of the things that reduce the anxiety when it comes to making decisions, I think of it as analysis paralysis. We think about something so much that we just become neutralized and we just don't move and make a decision. I think not making a decision is a decision. And I think all salespeople are decision makers because they have to make decisions as to how they trade their time every single day. And sometimes there's anxiety with salespeople making a commitment to do something as much as there is a prospect or a client committing to do something. I've heard you talk about some of the areas that create stress for people in today's marketplace. Could you elaborate a little bit more on some of those three areas, Terry?
Yeah. Stress actually is so invisible. It happens to salespeople. It happens to the buyers. The buyers feel like stressed out because they are afraid of making the wrong decisions. And sellers got stressed because the deal is on the line. They don't know whether that's going to go through or not. So from the seller's perspective, how do you reduce the stress of the buyers? One way is to give them a sense of control. The sense of control is so powerful in reducing people's stress. This actually has been demonstrated by many studies. I'd like to give you a very simple experimental paradigm to demonstrate how a sense of control can reduce people's stress. Just imagine two scenarios. First scenario, you put a guy in a room, you blast a loud, obnoxious noise randomly. You measure his blood pressure. His blood pressure will go up for sure. This is really a typical way to induce somebody's stress. Now, the second scenario, you put a guy in a room, you blast the same loud, obnoxious noise randomly. Then you give him a button. You tell him, when you press this button, you can lower the noise, you can reduce the frequency. Well, this guy, he keeps pressing the button. Well, he's hearing the same loud noise. You measure his blood pressure. You will find out his blood pressure stays low, simply because he has a sense of control. So when we have a sense of control, our stress level goes down. But from the seller's perspective, how do you give your customer a sense of control? You give them choices. When people have choices, they feel like, okay, I can reduce that. Really, I'm in control. I can decide what's best for me. There's a very elegant example of this. This actually happens in 1980s when Williams-Sonoma first came out with a bread making machine. They came out with just one model. The one model did not sell very well because back then people didn't know what it was, and people didn't know whether this was good value. So Williams-Sonoma did something very counterintuitive, but it's very clever. They came out with a bigger, more expensive model. The bigger, more expensive model did not sell very well at all, but the original model started flying off the shelf. So this is kind of puzzling. What happened? One major reason is when you give people just one choice, they don't feel like they have control. So their decision was based on, should I buy this or should I not buy this? But when you give them two options, you shift their decision from buying it versus not buying it to which one I should buy. So you make that shift in their decision making, and then they decide, okay, the cheaper one is good value, so they bought the cheaper one. This is why the cheaper one started flying the shelf. So when you give people options, give them choices, that gives them sense of control, that lower their stress of making the wrong decision.
Yeah, one of the things that we teach, and I know Scott's talked about this too, I love the alternative choice close. I do it for appointments. I do it for the final close of a deal. You know, do you want column A or do you want column B? Do you want to meet Wednesday? You want to meet Thursday? You want to meet in the morning? You want to meet in the afternoon? And it really does help narrow down for people. And I think what you're saying is true. It gives them that choice. It feels like they're the one who are pushing things in a particular direction.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and giving the prospects control, it makes it easier for them to not feel like, I mean, one of the greatest fears that prospects have with salespeople is losing control. And when we ask questions and we give them options, we're giving them a choice. And I mean, I think of some of these practices, and I think about negotiating with a 2-year-old. I mean, it's very similar because you're taking something away from a 2-year-old if they're not behaving, and the 2-year-old knows what it's like to lose something. Well, it's the same thing with a prospect. They know what it's like not to have something that they once had. And the same thing with making them feel like they're in control.
So Terry, can we have too many choices? Can we make it confusing or more confusing if we have, I've always heard 3 choices, right? And people will tend to take the middle one, but is there something else that can be too many choices?
Absolutely, Bill. When you have too many choices, we get this kind of a state which we call decision paralysis. They simply cannot really decide which one they're going to go with. Here's a really elegant study. Just imagine when the state fair opens up, you get a license to have an ice cream stand. You need to decide, okay, should I sell 3 flavors of ice cream or should I sell 30 flavors of ice cream? Well, if you ask a lot of customers, well, how many choices do you want? They will say, oh, I want 30 because the more options I get, the better, the more choices I have. But in reality, when you have 30 options, people don't buy because they look at 30 options. Everyone looks good, but they can only eat so much. At the end, they just say, I don't really know which one to go with. I'm just going to walk away. And if you give them 3 options, vanilla, chocolate, strawberries, and they're going to pick one. They know which one they like the most, and very easy decision for them. Here's an interesting example. If you go to the Minnesota State Fair, there's a very popular place. They sell Sweet Martha's cookies. They only have two options. You can get a small portion or you can get a big bucket. They already have a long line, but people don't have to make that choice. They don't have too many choices. They either go with a small portion or get a big bucket. Very easy for people to make, and then they can move the line faster. So people, when you give them a number of options, people can make decision fast. But if you can give too many options, people get stuck. If you look at Amazon give customers anywhere from 3 to 4 options. So you want to buy a computer, you find your choice and you scroll down. Amazon going to give you side-by-side comparisons of another 2 or 3 computers for you to choose from. So Amazon does not give you 20 options. Amazon only give you maybe about 2 to 3 additional options for you to choose from. So limit options you give people. So don't get them overwhelmed.
Well, Terry, unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time, but can you give us some other additional ways to reduce anxiety as we wrap things up?
I heard you guys speaking about this familiarity. Familiarity actually leads to liking. Familiarity reduces anxiety. The thing is, for salespeople, one easy thing to increase familiarity is to show up. Show up as often as you can. And this, simply by showing up, you create this unconscious familiarity. I'll end up with a simple example. This is a study. The study demonstrates that just being present can really make people like you more. This is how they did a study. They have this study in a classroom environment. So they had the researchers put 4 research assistants in the class. Those 4 research assistants, they show up in the classes, but they did not interact with anybody. They sat in the front row so everybody could see them. At the end of the semester, the researchers asked students, here are 4 photos of these 4 research assistants. Which one you like the most? And then they give the ratings. The ratings from the number 1, the most liked one, to the least liked one. It turned out the most liked one, she appeared in the class 15 times. The second most liked one, she appeared in the class 10 times. The third one, 5 times. The least liked one, she did not show up in the class. But then the researcher asked the students, did you like her because you have seen her more often? The answer was no. They did not really recognize by seeing, or just kind of noticing them unconsciously. Right. They build a liking, they build a trust.
So that's kind of part of advertising and our ability to be in a customer's face often is that they see us, they start to feel that they know us.
Absolutely. Familiarity is the best vaccine against fear. That's the more you show up, the more people like you, and then the less alarming they feel when they get close to you.
Scott, any final questions for Terry?
No, I thought that was great. I really, believe that the familiarity is probably building trust and rapport is building familiarity and building that confidence that the prospect has in sharing information with salespeople. So I really love that familiarity.
Excellent. Terry, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us this morning. Hopefully we can have you back in the future and have a chance to talk through some more of these ways that salespeople can learn from this neuroscience that you've spent so much time learning about.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me here.
But now Terry's got some resources that are going to be on our page. Scott mentioned the video, the TED Talk that he did. So we'll have that, and then we'll have some links to his consulting services and some more information on this Why the Brain Buys from a written standpoint. This segment has been brought to you by the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program, presented by the hosts of the Get in the Door podcast.
Business is heating up, and now is the time to get back on the selling track. While others wait for the market to improve, prospects and opportunities await you now. Perhaps you want to be more productive on your prospecting, or you'd like to increase your closing percentage. Maybe having meetings online is not as comfortable as being in person. Sales reps are telling us they need some honest accountability and skill development to rise above the competition. Whatever your reason, this is the perfect time to engage with an experienced sales coach. That is why the host of Get in the Door podcast, Professor Scott Plum and Bill Hellkamp, have developed the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. For only $495, you can receive personal coaching from the same sales professionals you enjoy on this podcast. It all starts with a discussion to give us your insights into your specific goals, challenges, needs, and motivation. After your 1-hour online session to jumpstart your coaching process, you will receive 5 more half-hour individual coaching sessions to enable you to make improvements over time and create new habits. Most salespeople make their money back with just one sale. Go to getinthedoorpodcast.com to contact Bill or Scott about the Jumpstart Sales Coaching Program. Do you believe you deserve better results? Now is the time to invest in yourself and invest in your future.
All right, as we wrap up today, our golden nugget is from Frank Betcher, author of How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. Read it if you haven't read it. And he says, if you don't believe in what you're selling, neither will your prospect.
It's so true. And I think the reality of this quote is it will show. If you don't believe what you're selling, it will show. And after all the work that you go into building a relationship, trust and rapport with somebody, and if you're not buying what you're selling, it's just wasted time.
Yep,
it's
absolutely.
So
I wonder how that belief comes through reacting in a neuroscience way. I'd be interested to talk with Terry about that.
So we can find everything that we talked about today at getinthedoorpodcast.com. Fill out the form, enter our book drawing, watch the video that Terry did. As you know, 120,000 people saw it already. So
join the ranks.
Add to that list.
Next week, chapter 13 of Beyond Selling Value, Sweating the Details, Opportunity Planning. And our topic is staying mentally strong. Go out and get better one skill at a time.
Joyful selling.